It's the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Your Locked On Predators, your daily podcast on the Nashville Predators. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Monday morning and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Predators podcast. Thank you for making Locked On Predators your first listen every morning. Guys, it's game week. Starting this week until June, there is going to be hockey to talk about every single week. The Predators, of course, kick things off Thursday. Final rosters come out Tuesday. We're going to be talking a little bit about that. Who do we think is going to be among the final cuts? Also look ahead to the rest of this week. And we also had our last preseason game to wrap up. That's all coming up today. I'm your host, Nick Morgan. I'm a writer and editor at On the Forecheck. And I have a partner in crime.
You do. I am Ann Kimmel. I am a contributing writer at On the Forecheck.
Ann, are you ready for hockey?
Oh my gosh. I've been ready for about 16 years.
It seems like that's been how long we've had to wait between Preds games, hasn't it?
It's felt like dog years. This offseason has felt like dog years.
It's very weird. Like, the earlier your team winds out of the playoffs, it seems like the longer the offseason takes. And yes, I know it's from an actual time perspective, but, you know, you can be like in the Stanley Cup final and then look back at, you know, the first round games that happened a month ago and be like, wow, this seems like that happened like, you know, half a year ago.
Oh yeah, it's like
we've
that.
Had seasons change.
It's the alternative universe Marvel experience when it comes to hockey. It just feels like a whole other dimension when that happened.
Well, again, don't have to worry about that this week. We have actual regular season hockey to talk about. First, though, a little bit of preseason hockey to talk about. The Predators wrapped up their preseason slate with an impressive 4-3 win over the Carolina Hurricanes at a pretty packed Bridgestone Arena. Good preseason crowd so far this year. Preds actually finished their preseason 4-1-1, 4 straight wins. The two rosters were probably as close to a regular season roster as you'll get to any preseason game this season. And you saw that game. What are your final takeaways on the Preds preseason?
You know, the preseason's actually been pretty encouraging, not just the stats of the 4-1-1, which is fantastic. But I just think the team has played well. I think they've had good energy. The energy that you've seen in practice is the energy they've brought onto the ice. They have played more consistent hockey, more consistent game. You know, Saturday's game, the first period was a little bit of a slump, but they came back in the second period and played really well. I thought some of the players had excellent games. Yakov Trenin, I mean, you know, everybody pays attention to Yakov because he's like a giant giraffe on skates who hits really hard. But I think this season, you know, and even in practice, some of his offensive skills are really on display. And we got to see that on Saturday. So I'm excited to watch him this year. I think we had a great look this preseason at the roster. There's lots of potential roster combinations. So it's been nice to have a full preseason where we really get a chance to sort of see line combinations and defensive pairings and kind of get a sense of what John Hines may be seeing in practices. So fans, I think we have a better glimpse into what we're really going to get this season.
Yeah, I kind of want to talk about that second period because it's a preseason game. The Predators kind of coasted in the first. You know, you thought maybe it was like, oh, this is just going to be the big guns getting their feet wet, you know, see what they can do. But they actually, you notice a big uptick in energy as if they were kind of preparing for the regular season in terms of just turning it up a notch in the later stages of a game. They didn't coast, which I really liked. You know, again, that top line, Matt Duchene feeding Yossi on that first goal to kind of turn things around. That's, to me, has been the story of the preseason, is just how well that top line has looked, not just in the preseason games, because, there's only so much you can take from preseason, but, they've looked well in camp. They've looked good in the
Yes.
practices together. And, we talked about this earlier. If that first line gets going, then all of a sudden you are talking about a very different situation with the Nashville Predators moving forward. You're not necessarily in a rebuild. You might be able to contend.
Yes. And, I think, having watched camp, one of the players that I think has had the best camp is Matt Duchene.
Right.
And, I don't know how much of that is what he's been doing in the off season and what he's done with him, but you put him together with Forsberg and Johansson, and that line has performed so well, games and in camp. And I think you're right. I think that line can set a tone with energy, with offense, with physicality that sets a tone for the way the entire team plays. And I think you're kind of starting to see a whole different energy. There aren't a ton of changes to this lineup from last year, but I think the energy and sort of the team vibe, to quote Ryan Johansson,
They
I think
vibing.
they vibing. I think they vibing through the preseason, and I think it's got they're in a great spot to kick off Thursday night.
Yeah, the other big star for me this camp has been the Herd line.
Yes.
And everybody loves the Herd line. They brought a lot of energy to the team last year. They're kind of the team's checking line. Everybody loves them. We know they kind of, get out there, smash bodies, and make games fun to watch. But I think this preseason, you kind of saw them turning into a more all around line. And again, I mean, last year, just by sheer force of their speed and physicality, they created some of the Preds' best scoring chances during games. But Yakov Trenin definitely looks much less of a wrecking ball and
Yes.
more of a more well-rounded power forward. Tanner Jeannot, we knew going into this year, had a little bit of scoring pop. I think he's developed a little bit of a better nose for the net this year. And Colton Sissons has been a pretty solid depth scorer in the past. I mean, he got 30 points just 2 years ago. So that to me is a line that in the right situation can develop into a little bit of a grind line a la Detroit in the mid 2000s, where, yeah, they're going to go out there, play physical, get people off their game, piss people off. But at the same time, you can put them out there and, get a couple of clutch goals.
Absolutely. And I think Colton Sissons is, you don't hear as much about him last season and this season, as far as on the stat sheet, but he is the facilitator of that line's success in so many ways. And that's a talent in and of itself. I think you've got Trenin and Jeannot both have looked even better in this camp. There's no, sophomore slump looking play from Tanner Jeannot. Yakov Trenin looks like a skilled, not just like you said, he doesn't have that wrecking ball look. He's more of like a nuclear missile, very specific, but also offensive threat. And it's fun because you look at the offense that Forsberg, Duchene, Johansson can generate and kind of the style that they'll generate their play from. And you look at Trenin, Sissons, and Jeannot, and it's the same style of play, but it is very different. And it'll be great to watch those two lines, especially kind of contend with other teams and see how other teams have to handle sort of two very different lines. And the second and third line, still trying to finalize and sort those out. There's some interesting things that could happen there too.
So the Predators have until Tuesday to finalize the opening night roster. Might have some news on that by the end of today. Actually, there's already been some roster cuts. We are going to walk you through where the roster stands now, who we think is going to be the final roster going into the opening night of the season. But first, Predators fans, I want to know if this sounds like you. You're watching the Preds game on your TV. You're watching another college football game on your laptop, and you are watching another random YouTube show just to have in the background on your phone. Also, all of those completely different usernames and passwords. If that sounds like your situation, you need DirecTV Stream. DirecTV Stream brings your live TV and on-demand favorites together like never before, so you can watch your favorite sports, movies, and shows all in one place. That means no more juggling remotes, no need to buy another device ever again, no more having to keep up with all these different weird usernames and passwords. The best part, no annual contract. Get rid of the clutter and the confusion and get your TV together with DirecTV Stream. You can learn more on directv.com. You need a compatible device, and the content varies by package.
David Harrison here, the Locked On Washington Football Team podcast, celebrating with you a 21 grain salute to a less boring sandwich thanks to Dave's Killer Bread. I don't know about you guys, but when I eat pizza, I eat it for the toppings, not the crust. And when I eat a sandwich, it's for what's inside the bread, not for the bread. But when I throw a sandwich on 21 whole grains and seeds, thin sliced bread from Dave's Killer Bread, it is the epitome of addition by subtraction. That thin sliced bread lets me focus on what's inside the sandwich, but also adds to the sandwich with killer taste, killer texture, killer nutrition, a subtle sweetness, and a seed-coated crust. Dave's Killer Bread is America's #1 organic bread for a reason. It tastes so stinking good. Dave's Killer Bread is made with the highest quality organic and non-GMO ingredients and is power-packed with whole grains, fiber, and protein. Visit daveskillerbread.com to learn more and look for Dave's Killer Bread in the bread aisle of your local grocery store.
All right, thank you for making Locked On Predators your first listen every day. Hey, this week, be sure to go check out the Crosscheck Live NHL season preview show. Andrew Berkshire and Mary Clark are going to be walking you through all of the key NHL storylines. They're going to have a drop-in from our roster of local NHL hosts, me and Ann included. Shameless plug. We are also going to have fantasy insights from Locked On Fantasy Hockey's Scott Cullen, plus Stanley Cup playoff predictions. So that is coming up Tuesday, October 12th, live from 6 to 7 Eastern, 5-6 Central. And that is on the Locked On NHL YouTube page. So you need to keep an eye out on that. All right, Ann, we're talking roster moves.
Oh, goodness.
This is going to be every fan's either favorite thing or worst nightmare, probably depending on how some of these decisions go.
Absolutely.
So right now, here's where the roster stands. Technically, according to the official roster, we are at 26 players. Igor Afanasyev and Jeremy Davies have been reassigned to Milwaukee. However, we also got word that Michael McCarron and Connor Ingram have been placed on waivers, presumably so they can go to Milwaukee.
Yeah, that's what we thought before, but go ahead. Mm-hmm.
That is going to take the roster down to 24. That is
so close, and yet.
So close and yet. So that's going to leave us with 14 forwards and 8 defensemen, because goaltenders are now at 2. So here's where we stand now. Forwards: Cody Glass, Philip Forsberg, Colton Sissons, Luke Cunnin, Yakov Trenin, Nick Cousins, Rocco Grimaldi, Matthew Olivier, Philip Tomasino, Ellie Tolvanen, Mikael Granlund, Tanner Jeannot, Ryan Johansson, and Matt Duchene. On defense: Matt Benning, Matthias Ekholm, Ben Harper, Alexander Carrier, Philip Myers, Dante Fabro, Roman Josi, and Mark Borowiecki. So, if you noticed, there's 24. Preds need to get to at least 23. And, 14 forwards, that means there's 2 extra forwards, or 8 defensemen, which means there's 2 extra defensemen. So, and this is kind of looking like a situation where it's going to come down to whether Poyle wants to keep 2 extra forwards or 2 extra defensemen.
It is, and this is one of the most stressful, drama-filled sort of final rosters we've had in a while, I think. It'll be interesting to see which they go with. The defensemen, if you look at the defense core, of course you have Josi and Ekholm. You have Fabro, who has, he's got some time under his belt, but also coming off of injury and sort of struggled a little bit last year. So it makes you wonder, are they going to lean a little bit more on keeping some keeping an extra defenseman around and sort of having a bigger pool to pull from there. As far as the forwards go, with Afanasiev going to Milwaukee, that sort of quells some of the speculation, but there's still some question about where are they going to finally land on that? Where is Tomasino going to end up? Have they are they all in on Phil in Bridgestone, or are they going to maybe bring in somebody with more experience, keep Rocco Grimaldi up, which that's a whole question. Fans feel pretty strongly about where Rocco Grimaldi should end up.
Yeah,
You
he's
have
been
Matt.
great this preseason too, so that's not an easy decision.
He has made this very difficult. His camp has been phenomenal. He's had a great preseason. He has played well on the different lines combinations that I've seen him on in the camp. You also have Matthew Olivier, who I think is probably one of Poyle's favorites because he fits that mold of the herd line. So it's not an easy. There's really not an easy forward to eliminate. I don't know. What do you think? Do you think Phil Tomasino is in?
I think it depends on excuse me. I think it depends on where the Preds see Tomasino potentially winding up on the lineup card. Because I think if you get to the situation where Tomasino has played well enough that he can be your second line winger, maybe a third line winger under certain circumstances, although now we're kind of getting into the weeds. If he's going to have time, if he's going to get like 15 minutes of ice time a game with a decent amount of special teams play, then I think they're going to make a spot for him. But I also think that if, like we mentioned, if some other people, Ellie Tolvin has played pretty well this preseason, so is Luke Cunnin.
Yes.
If you start getting those guys and you say, well, I think they'll probably pair a little bit better with Mikael Granlund, then you have to really look and see what's best for Phil Tomasino. Is he going to be the extra man every night? Is he going to be kind of winding up on a line, where he's might not be the best stylistic fit?
Right.
Then at that point, you don't want to put a square peg in a round hole like you do with Kyle Turris a few years ago.
Oh, don't get me started.
Yeah, that's another tangent we can go off on. But I think if I was David Poyle, I would much rather have Philip Tomasino in that case be your star in Milwaukee, at least for a month or two of the season. Get 19, 20 minutes a game playing on the first line, dedicated power play time.
Right.
And then at that point, you're giving him regular minutes, getting him into the groove. And it might be a situation like we saw with Alexander Radulov when he first came into the league, where everybody kind of knew he was NHL ready in the right situation. Wasn't really a spot for him. So he went to Milwaukee and just killed it for, I think it wound up being about 3 months. I think it was something like something outrageous, like 25 points in 18 games or something like that. But he was ready. He was getting first line minutes, and then when he came to the Preds, there was less of a transition. So I think that is going to be the deciding factor on Tomasino.
I think so too. I think the decision for Tomasino isn't going to necessarily be about, his hockey play as much as it's going to be about taking advantage of his hockey play. On Saturday they had Tolvin and Granlund and Cunnin together and they looked great. The third line was Cousins, Glass, and Tomasino, and then there's a part of me that thinks, we still have Cody Glass kind of coming in here. And this is a guy who's got some great potential. Would it be more beneficial to put Glass with somebody who's got a little bit more NHL ice time, whether it's Grimaldi or Olivier? Cousins has had a great camp. So I think Glass and Cousins together, that's helpful. Is it better to kind of give even Glass, 1 or 2 months with somebody with more experience? It's going Tomasino. I think the Tomasino decision is going to be decided not so much on his play, but on the team as a whole.
Right. And the other question becomes, who do you cut? Because everybody has played so well. We talked about Matthew Olivier being really good. I think a lot of Preds fans, would look at this roster and see one name in particular that I think they absolutely would want to set down. but I think it's a little bit more of a complicated situation than that. We're going to touch on that in a little bit. But first, a little bit of a confession. I am really trying to get into shape this year, but I really love to snack. I have a sweet tooth. That's why Built Bar comes in handy. Built Bar has so many delicious flavors. There's something for everyone. And when I say there's something for everyone, there's literally something for everyone. There's coconut, cherry barcia, raspberry, mint brownie, double chocolate, salted caramel, strawberry, orange, cookies and cream, German chocolate. The list goes on and on and on. I'm personally favorite to the cherry barcia. That's just me. I like the cherry taste. But if you want to mix and match, you want to try a couple different ones, you can get a mixed box. You'll get 2 of each of the 9 flavors. Not only are Built Bar flavors the best tasting, but they're also healthy too. High in protein, high in fiber, low in carbs and sugar. So order today, get the grasshopper cookie, raspberry, whatever you want. And if you don't want to take it from some random guy on a podcast, Built Bar is the official protein bar of the U.S. track and field team, who did pretty well in Tokyo just a couple of months ago. So there's a shameless plug there. If you go to built.com and use the promo code LOCKED15, you'll get 15% off your order. Again, promo code LOCKED15 to get 15% off at built.com.
This episode is brought to you by Off the Eaten Path. You're hungry for adventure, so try a snack that satisfies your curiosity and your appetite. Off the Eaten Path Veggie Crisps and Chickpea Veggie Crisps are bursting with flavor and texture, designed to take your taste buds on a journey. Packed with real veggies like chickpeas, black beans, rice, and green peas, these gluten-free crisps are deliciously crunchy and non-GMO Project Verified. Plus, they have no artificial flavors, colors, or preservatives. So it's a great tasting snack you can feel good about. Real veggies. Really delicious. Shop now for Off the Eaten Path Veggie Crisps on Amazon or at stores near you.
All right, Ann. So we talked about Tomasino. That was kind of the headline of who's left on this roster. Let's look at some other people on the bubble. We talked about Rocco Grimaldi a little bit. I think a lot of people thought that he was maybe going to be gone by the time the regular season started, whether it be waivers or trade or whatever. But he has come out this year and proven that he can be a very strong addition to the Preds roster if he's in the right situation.
Absolutely. Somebody must have, Rocco must have heard some of these rumblings, because he has played in practices and in preseason. He's played like a man possessed. He is out to prove that he is worth a spot on this roster. And it's going to be a really tricky conversation to not have him on the roster. And yet again, it's all about putting it together. Rocco Grimaldi's had a preseason where I think he wouldn't be much of a question on a lot of other NHL rosters.
Exactly.
So, I don't know what they're going to end up doing with him, but if he's not on the ice, it's going to cost something. You're going to have to sacrifice something, because he has had a great camp. Rocco Grimaldi is somebody with speed. He's great on kind of a transition. He loves those breakaways. But where does he fit? And if he steps in, who steps out? So the Rocco Grimaldi conversation is a lot more complicated than, he's just an okay player. He has come into this camp and shown his skill. He has improved. He's played like a man possessed. But again, it's all about fit.
And speaking of that, another guy that is kind of on the bubble just for roster spot reasons is Matthew Olivier. And this was a guy who was the OG Herd line last year, played really well, wound up getting hurt, and Tanner Jeannot kind of jumped in and took his spot for him. And Jeannot has a little bit more of an offensive punch. Olivier is a fan favorite, but it comes down to, do you already have players like Matthew Olivier on the roster? And you look and you see Jeannot, who's kind of a bruising guy who can play both ways and still have some offensive pop. The Preds are loaded with strong two-way bottom six forwards.
Right.
And Olivier could just be a decision of, well, we already have these types of players. Are we going to need this going forward? The only thing is, I think the thing about Olivier is he is very limited in terms of style. That's not to
Right.
say he is not great on that fourth line. He is fantastic on the fourth line, but I feel he is most effective kind of spelling Tanner Jeannot, Yakov Trenin maybe, and unless barring an injury or one of them just really falls out of form, I think he could be handcuffed a little bit by the way he plays.
For sure. You don't see him subbing in for, say, Nick Cousins or
No,
Luke Cunnin anywhere.
that'd be
He
fun. That would be fun to say the least.
I mean, it would be worth watching. I'm just not sure it's going to get you the results you want. I think you're right. I think the problem is that he is a little bit redundant, and there's just no way with the way that Tanner Jeannot is playing right now that barring injury, I just don't see Jeannot coming off that fourth line. He's just producing too much. Same thing with Yakov Trenin. I think as good as Matthew Olivier is, this is not a bad, he's not a bad player. He did really well last year with the minutes that he had and until he was injured, but he's redundant. He's not somebody you can sub in just anywhere, like you said. So it'll be interesting to see what they do with him. And especially because he is sort of the prototype of what they've wanted to develop and what's been successful on that fourth line. So I think that's a hard breakup for David Poile.
To me, going to the defenseman, that is where the story of the roster cuts are going to take shape, because
Yes.
you could make a look at that roster of defensemen and point to 7 guys that you would say no brainers are locked for that roster. Obviously you're going to have Yossi Ekholm. You're going to have Dante Fabro. You're going to have Philip Myers, and then Benning and Borowiecki have, I would say the Preds really know what they have in him. Benning, I thought, played great last year, and has looked pretty good in the preseason. Mark Borowiecki coming back from injury, and some of the off-ice issues that we talked about last week. And then Alexander Carrier, I guess, would technically be a bubble guy, but he was on the first line in the playoffs last year, and he's probably on the bubble just because of roster spots alone. But I would say right now he's played well enough to maybe be in your top 4. So is that really a guy you're on the fence about? And if so, what is wrong with you?
Well, and you look at how he played. I mean, he was paired up with Roman Josi. And when you have a Roman Josi, who you put with him matters. And I think Carrier has done a good job of sort of covering space so that Roman Josi can be Roman Josi. But again, like you said, all comes down to who is available. I think in a vacuum, some of these decisions are very easy to make. But when you look at there's only so many spots and who do we have sitting here and who fits together, this is when it's going to get complicated. I think, like you said, Matt Benning has had a really good preseason. I thought, in practices, Mark Borowiecki has looked great. And not his play has been solid, but he also just has a great light energy to him that I think is helpful for where the Predators are sort of setting the tone. Like, I think he has been a little bit of a tone setter in the practices, and then we come down to talk about, Ben Harpur. What do we do with Ben Harpur? There's one for you.
Well, I know what I would do with Ben Harpur, and that's not a knock on Harpur as a person or a player. But I don't think he is a long-term fit for the NHL. He is the person that I would cut to go down to 23 players.
Right.
But at the same time, in the past, David Poile has shown he likes to keep 8 defensemen, and he has shown he likes to keep a player like Ben Harpur around. I mean, we saw it with Jared Tenorti last year. I mean, he was ultimately put on waivers because Ben Harpur came up.
Right.
And he likes that style of player where he can put him in and be like, okay, well, this is a player that's, going to have some size, a little bit more physicality towards people in front of the net. He's never going to get you 20 minutes of ice time. And that's the only thing. is if the Predators want to go a little more skilled in their defensive this year, I mean, you're going to have a pretty good defenseman on your third defensive pair regardless. I mean,
Right.
I think Alexander Carrier is a guy who can play with either of your two star defensemen, Yossi or Ekholm. I almost combined the two there into some, although I guess maybe we could just call him Yoki.
They're like the brand. They're like the, what is it? The Brangelina
the
of
Brangelina.
the Predators. Yes.
There we go. That's
Yoki.
the only reason we cannot afford to trade Ekholm this year.
That's right. Now he has a nickname.
But yeah, that's what makes it complicated. It's just the style of Ben Harpur is somebody that Boyle and Hines even have shown they really like to have. I just think there's going to be mass riots if you send Philip Tomasino down and keep Ben Harpur on the roster.
Well, I mean, it's comparing apples and oranges, but one of the apples is, people will say is rotten and the orange is really, really good. But
oranges.
I really, Harpur is, like you said, he's 6'6". He's the size player that they seem to have a penchant for. They really like that. But the caveat with Ben Harpur for me is, yes, you want to have somebody, I understand you wanted to have size and physicality for that, that third line, but it has to come without risk. On Saturday, he had just a dumb penalty that put the Predators in a 5-on-3 situation. Now they were able to get out of the 5-on-3, relatively unscathed, but you can't have somebody in there whose sole job it is to be, that physical enforcer, that bruiser, who is going to make dumb choices. The Predators cannot have their games hinge on special teams, and Harpur tends to lean towards a little more, physicality, especially this year when they're going to be watching things like cross-checking a little bit extra. There you get your size, but you also have to balance it out with your skill and just good hockey sense.
All right, so final prediction. Who do you think the Preds are cutting from the roster?
I can tell you who I would cut. I would probably cut Matthew Olivier. I mean, I would cut Ben Harpur. I just don't think that's going to happen. I don't think that's going to happen.
I'm with you. I think it's going to be Matthew Olivier, and I hate that, but
yes,
I like I mentioned before, I think the Preds like having 8 defensemen. There might also be a small injury we don't really know about, but I think that's going to be it. And I think Philip Tomasino is going to get a start. So stay tuned for us this week because we are going to be talking about the final roster. And we're going to have a look ahead at the Seattle Kraken, who are the Predators' first opponents. And if you're a casual hockey fan and you don't know the name Seattle Kraken, they are the newest team. So we're going to do a little bit of a deep dive on them. In the meantime, though, I am Nick Morgan. You can find my work at ontheforecheck.com. Also follow me at Twitter on _NSMorgan. And where can the fine folks find you?
You can find my work at ontheforecheck.com, and I am on Twitter at AnnK_Mama on Ice.
All right, and thank you everybody who listened for making Locked On Predators your first listen every single day. For now, head on over to Locked On Fantasy Hockey. Scott Cullen leans on his decades of fantasy hockey insight and experience every day to help you be the expert of your fantasy league. You're going to need it soon. It's free and available on all platforms. See you tomorrow, everybody.